The worst villains aren't the ones you see coming. They're not mass criminals or big-time scammers. No, the worst ones smile at you from across the street, act like they're looking out for the neighborhood, and convince everyone that you're the problem when you call them out. And that's exactly the kind of villain Karen Doty was. She ran our HOA like a personal kingdom, handing out ridiculous fines, controlling everyone's lives, and making sure no one questioned her power. But when packages started disappearing, including one of mine, I started paying attention. People thought it was random theft, but I knew better. And when I found out the truth, that Karen was stealing from the entire neighborhood, I made a decision. If she wanted to take from me, I was going to take something from her entire presidency. Before we dive in, please comment below where you're watching from. I've always believed that the worst kind of villains aren't the ones you see coming. They're not the burglars in ski masks or the con artists pulling million-dollar schemes. No, the real ones smile at you, wave from their driveways, pretend they're looking out for the neighborhood, and make you feel like you're the crazy one for not trusting them. That's exactly the kind of villain Karen Doty was. When my wife and I moved into this neighborhood, Karen was one of the first people to introduce herself. She showed up at our door within days, armed with a forced smile and a clipboard. "Welcome to the community," she said, handing me a thick HOA rulebook before I even had a chance to shake her hand. "We have high standards here, and I just know you'll fit right in as long as you follow the rules." At first, I thought she was just overly involved. Every neighborhood has one of those people. The type who takes block parties a little too seriously, or reminds you to bring your trash bins in the second the truck pulls away. But Karen, she wasn't just a little involved. She ran this HOA like a dictatorship. I learned quickly that she was everywhere. She patrolled the streets like a one-woman security force, clipboard tucked under her arm, looking for anything that didn't meet her community standards. If your car was parked slightly off-center, you'd get a warning. Grass not trimmed to the exact HOA-approved height? Fine. One of my neighbors got cited for having excessive wind chimes. Yeah, wind chimes. At first, I figured as long as I stayed out her way, I'd be fine. I followed the rules, kept my lawn trimmed, and didn't park in the wrong spots. Then the packages started disappearing. At first, I thought it was a fluke. Maybe the delivery driver marked it as delivered too early or left at the wrong house. But then I started hearing the same thing from my neighbors. Amazon says my package was delivered, but it's gone. My groceries were supposed to be here an hour ago, but they're missing. People started blaming porch pirates. The idea made sense. This was a nice neighborhood, and thieves targeted places like this. But there was one problem with that theory. The thefts always happened when Karen was outside. She'd be out for a walk or just checking on things right around the time a package would disappear. A neighbor mentioned once that they saw her carrying an Amazon box that wasn't hers, but when they asked about it, she just laughed it off and walked away. Then it happened to me. I had an important package coming, something I needed for work. I got the delivery notification, stepped outside and nothing. No package, no slip, just my empty porch. I checked the bushes, looked around my driveway. Nowhere. Frustrated, I checked my security camera feed, and then I remembered Karen had already thought ahead. A few months before, the HOA had passed a rule banning security cameras, claiming they ruined the community's aesthetic. At the time, I thought it was just another Karen power trip, but now I knew exactly why she wanted the cameras gone. Karen wasn't protecting privacy. She was protecting herself. I had no proof, not yet, but I wasn't going to let this go. Karen wanted to steal from me? Fine. She had no idea what I was about to steal from her. Karen Doty had spent years getting away with whatever she wanted. She hid behind HOA rules, bullied people into compliance, and somehow convinced everyone that she was untouchable. But she made one mistake. She stole from me. I wasn't going to let this slide. If I confronted her without proof, she'd just smirk, deny everything, and act like I was crazy. If I went to the HOA board, they'd probably just shrug and say I needed solid evidence before making accusations. Fine, I'd get evidence, and I'd make sure it was undeniable. I spent the next evening planning my move. Calling the cops wouldn't help. Not yet. I needed something they couldn't ignore, so I set a trap. I went online and ordered a decoy package. It looked just like a normal delivery, an Amazon-branded box, perfectly sealed with packing tape, complete with a printed shipping label. But inside, not electronics, not valuables, a GPS tracker. The moment that package moved, I'd be able to track its exact location in real time. But that wasn't enough. Karen had banned visible security cameras, but there was nothing in the HOA rulebook about smart home devices. So I installed a motion-activated porch light that had a hidden camera inside. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary light fixture, but inside it had night vision, motion tracking, and a direct live feed to my phone. I placed the fake package perfectly on my porch, just far enough from the door to be tempting, but not so far that it looked staged. And then I waited. Less than an hour later, I got a motion alert on my phone. I pulled up the live feed, and there she was. Karen Doty. She wasn't even trying to be sneaky. She wasn't wearing a hoodie, didn't have a mask, nothing. Just Karen in her usual HOA uniform of pressed khakis and a pastel cardigan, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She walked up my driveway at a casual pace, like she was just doing her routine patrol. Then she paused at my porch. I could see it in her eyes the moment she spotted the package. The quick glance around, the slight tilt of her head. She hesitated just long enough to make sure no one was watching. Then, without a second thought, she snatched the box, tucked it under her arm, and walked off like she had every right to take it. I checked the GPS tracker app. The signal was moving straight to Karen's house. So I waited a few minutes, then grabbed my phone and casually walked toward her house, pretending to be out for an evening stroll. When I reached her driveway, I stopped. Her garage door was slightly open, and inside, my stomach dropped. Boxes, dozens of them, stacked in the corner, some still sealed, others ripped open. Karen hadn't just been stealing from me. She had been robbing the entire neighborhood. I zoomed in with my phone, recording everything. The labels, the addresses, the sheer number of stolen deliveries sitting in her garage like some kind of twisted hoarder's collection. Names I recognized, my neighbors. She was hoarding stolen packages in her garage like some kind of suburban pirate. And if she thought she could keep getting away with it, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. I wasn't in the cops. If I showed up at the station claiming my neighbor was stealing packages, they'd ask for proof, and I just know it's her wasn't going to cut it. Karen Doyle was the type of person who twisted reality to fit her version of events, and I wasn't about to give her that chance. No. If I was going to take her down, I needed to make sure it happened in front of everyone. The next HOA meeting was just a few days away. I had never bothered to attend before. Why would I? It was always just Karen lording over the neighborhood, listing off new rules and slapping people with fines like she was running a boot camp instead of suburban HOA. But this time, I had a reason to be there. I got to the clubhouse early, taking a seat near the back, watching as people trickled in. There were the usual homeowners clutching violation notices, some looking annoyed, others defeated. I spotted Linda and Tom, two longtime board members who had blindly followed Karen for years, nodding along as she greeted them like she was some kind of celebrity. Then Karen took her usual place at the front, clipboard in hand, coffee mug emblazoned with the HOA logo sitting beside her like a trophy. She scanned the room, her gaze skimming over me like I wasn't even there. Perfect. She started off with the usual nonsense. We'll begin with a reminder about seasonal decorations. Any holiday displays that do not meet the HOA guidelines will result in fines. Additionally, we've had some complaints about lawn maintenance, and I'd like to remind everyone that grass must be trimmed to a uniform height of... I stood up. I actually have something to bring to the board's attention. Karen barely looked up. Oh, what now? She sighed, flipping through her papers like she had more important things to do. I walked toward the front of the room, pulled out my phone, and connected it to the large screen behind her. Karen loved this screen. She used it to show people examples of community violations, a not-so-subtle way of shaming homeowners into submission. Tonight, it was going to show something else. The first clip played, and the room went dead silent on the big screen. Clear as day was Karen. She strolled right my driveway, looked around, and snatched a package off my porch. Someone gasped. A few heads turned to look at her. I let the video roll. The second clip played, Karen again, different day. Same casual attitude, this time grabbing a box from my neighbor's porch. Then the final clip. Karen's garage door half open, dozens of stolen packages stacked inside. I turned to the board. Would you like to explain this, Karen? She jumped to her feet, so fast her chair screeched against the floor. This is doctored. I don't know what this is, but it's not real. I folded my arms. You sure? Because we can call the police right now and let them take a look at your garage. The room erupted. People started talking over each other, muttering, shaking their heads in disbelief. Then Tom, one of Karen's closest allies on the board, spoke up. Karen, is this real? For the first time, I saw uncertainty in her face. Her eyes darted between the board members and the furious neighbors now whispering to each other. She was losing control. Then she snapped. Oh, don't act like you're all perfect, she yelled, slamming her hands on the table. I have worked tirelessly to keep this community running, and this is the thanks I get. Do you know how much stress I deal with? The complaints, the violations, the endless work I do to keep this neighborhood in order. Someone from the back of the room yelled, by stealing our stuff. The laughter that followed sealed her fate. Karen's face burned red. Her hands curled into fists. She looked like she was about to burst into another rant, but she must have realized it was over. I could see it in her eyes, the moment she truly understood that she had lost. But what she didn't know yet was that I wasn't just here to expose her. I was here to replace her. And when I said my next words, I knew exactly how much it would destroy her. You know what, Karen? I said, smiling. If you're so stressed about running the HOA, maybe it's time someone else takes over. Her mouth dropped open, and the moment I saw the panic in her face, I knew I had her, because Karen Doty had spent years making sure no one ever ran against her. But now I was coming for her job, and if she thought she was going to stop me, she had no idea what was coming next. Karen Doty had spent years ruling this neighborhood like a queen on her throne, issuing fines like royal decrees, controlling everything from the color of front doors to how long a car could sit in a driveway. She never had to answer to anyone. No one had ever challenged her until now. The moment I suggested someone else should take over, the room shifted. I saw the realization hit her like a brick wall. She had spent so long making sure no one ever questioned her authority, so long keeping people afraid to push back, that it had never even occurred to her that someone might replace her. She blinked, then let out a short, forced laugh. You run for HOA president? She shook her head, voice dripping with mock amusement. You have no idea what you're talking about. Running an HOA isn't just making empty promises. It's hard work. It takes leadership. And frankly, you don't have what it takes. I shrugged. Sounds like something we should let the neighborhood decide. A murmur spread through the room. Some of the board members looked intrigued. A few neighbors actually nodded. For the first time ever, people were realizing something. Karen wasn't inevitable. Karen saw, too. She tried to cover her panic, plastering on her usual condescending smile. All right, fine. You want to embarrass yourself? Be my guest. But I'll warn you, running this HOA isn't a joke. It requires someone who understands policy, budgeting, and community planning. Linda, one of the board members, cut in. He meets the eligibility requirements. Karen's head snapped toward her. Linda flipped through a folder. The bylaws say any homeowner in good standing can run. That means we'll be holding an election. I could practically hear Karen's teeth grinding. She was trying to hold it together, but her hands were white-knuckled around her clipboard. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You people really think he can do this? You want someone like him running things. Tom, another board member, sighed. Honestly, Karen, maybe it's time for some fresh leadership. Karen's face went pale. It was happening too fast for her to stop. I smiled. Well, Karen, looks like you'll finally get to see how hard it is to have someone constantly breathing down your neck, questioning everything you do. She scoffed. Oh, please, you'll never win. I have been serving this community for years. People trust me. I turned to crowd. By a show of hands, who would be interested in having an election for HOA president? Hands went up, lots of them. Karen's face twisted in fury. I could see the rage in her eyes. This wasn't just a power struggle to her. This was her identity, her control, her way of life, and she was losing it. She turned back to me, voice shaking. "Fine, let's do it. But don't come crying when you lose." I smirked. "Oh, Karen, you have no idea what's coming for you." Running for HOA president wasn't just about beating Karen Doty in an election. It was about exposing her for what she truly was: a fraud, a thief, and the worst kind of liar. I wasn't going to just take her title. I was going to take her down. I spent the next few weeks campaigning hard. I knocked on doors, spoke to neighbors, and listened to all the grievances people had bottled up for years. The excessive fines, the arbitrary rules, the way Karen seemed to target certain homeowners more than others. People were angry, and Karen, she was panicking. She started handing out violations like candy. Suddenly, people were getting fined for absurd reasons: lawns that were too green, porches that were too cluttered, mailboxes that lacked uniformity. But the desperation didn't stop there. Karen started spreading rumors about me, telling people I was going to raise HOA fees. OA fees allow low-quality tenants in and ruin property values. She even tried to sabotage my campaign by throwing away HOA election ballots. That's when I knew she wasn't just scared of losing. She was hiding something. So I started digging. I requested years of HOA financial records, a process Karen had made as difficult as possible. Of course, she stalled, ignored my emails, and even claimed the files had been lost in a clerical error. So I went to Tom and Linda, the two board members who had slowly started to turn against her. That's when I found it. Buried in years of financial reports were massive discrepancies in spending. Karen had been funneling thousands of dollars in HOA fees into a separate bank account under her name. She'd been inflating costs, faking invoices, and charging homeowners for repairs that never happened. She wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was an embezzler. I made copies of everything: bank statements, false invoices, budget reports. If Karen was going to fight dirty, I was about to bury her. And what better place to do that than at the final HOA debate? The event was packed. Homeowners who had never attended a single meeting suddenly showed up, eager to see Karen finally get what she deserved. Karen sat at her usual spot in the front, but she looked different this time. Her smile was strained, her posture stiff. She could feel it. Her grip was slipping. She started the debate with her usual nonsense, talking about how she had protected the neighborhood for years and how her leadership had kept property values high. Then it was my turn. I walked up to the podium, took out the stack of financial documents, and cleared my throat. For years, Karen has told you that your HOA fees were going toward community improvements, that every fine, every extra charge was necessary to keep things running. But that's a lie. I held up the paperwork. These are bank statements showing repeated transfers from the HOA account into Karen's personal bank account. This is money that was supposed to go toward fixing sidewalks and maintaining common areas. But instead, Karen was paying herself. The room exploded. People gasped. Someone shouted, "Is this real?" Karen shot out her chair. "That's a lie," she screamed. "You faked that." I smiled. "Right. So you wouldn't mind if we had an independent auditor take a look?" Her face went pale. I turned back to the audience. "This is who's been running your HOA. A thief, a liar, someone who's been using your money to pad her own pockets." Tom, one of her last allies, cleared his throat. "Karen, do you have an explanation?" Karen looked around the room, eyes darting wildly, searching for support, but there was no one left on her side. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is a setup. You're all against me." And then she made her last mistake. She turned to Tom and Linda, the two people who had supported her for years, and spat. "You knew about this? Don't you dare turn on me now." A deadly silence settled. Over the room. Tom looked stunned. Linda slowly shook her head. "Karen, are you admitting this is real?" Karen froze. Her face twisted into something between rage and desperation. Then she did what she always did. She ran. She grabbed her clipboard, shoved it into her bag, and bolted for the door. But just before she made it out, Tom stood up. "We'll be holding a vote," he said loudly, turning to the crowd. "Effective immediately." Karen stopped dead in her tracks. all in favor of moving Karen Doty as HOA president. Hand shot up. Karen stumbled backward like she'd been hit. Her mouth opened, but for the first time ever, no words came out. All in favor of electing a new HOA president. More hands. Karen looked at me, and for the first time in her life, she knew she had lost. Karen Doty had spent years ruling this neighborhood like a tyrant, and for just as long, people let her. She controlled everything, the rules, the fines, even the board members themselves. But now she had nothing. After the vote, she stood frozen at the front of the room, her entire world crumbling in real time. Her clipboard was clutched so tightly in her hands that her knuckles went white, her eyes darting wildly between the neighbors she had spent years intimidating into submission. But no one was on her side anymore. She let out a sharp breath, her face twisted into something between anger and disbelief. "Leah, you're all making a huge mistake," she hissed. "You have no idea what you're doing." Tom, who had once been one of her biggest offenders, adjusted his glasses. "Karen, it's over." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Oh, you'll all be begging for me back? Just wait until this place falls apart." And with that, she grabbed her things, shoved past the crowd, and stormed out the door. The second she was gone, the room erupted. For the first time since I moved in, I saw actual relief on people's faces. Neighbors started talking. Not about fines, not about Karen's latest rule, but about what they could finally fix now that she was out of the way. And the first thing to go? Every ridiculous rule Karen had ever put in place. Within the first week of my presidency, I tore through that rule book like my life depended on it. The security camera ban? Gone. Homeowners had the right to protect their property. The insane system? Overhauled. No more penalties for trivial nonsense like wind chimes or improperly decorated mailboxes. Karen Doty spent years controlling everything. The rules, the fines, the board members, even the way people live their lives. But once she lost power, it all crumbled. Her neighbors, who once feared her, erased every rule she ever put in place. Her allies turned their backs. The people she bullied took their neighborhood back. And Karen? She couldn't stand it. I catch glimpses of her peeking through her curtains, watching the community thrive without her in charge. But the final blow came when I saw it. A for sale sign in her front yard. Karen Doty, the same woman who built her entire identity around running this neighborhood, was leaving for good. She must have felt me watching, because as a moving truck loaded up, she turned and glared at me. But it wasn't the look of a ruthless HOA dictator anymore. It was defeat. And as I sat on my porch that evening, watching a freshly delivered package sit safely by my front door, I knew one thing for sure. Karen Doty would never steal from anyone again.